advise the Soviets at that time when they recognized the independent Latvia forever. Being hardworking and intelligent, the Latvians could develop a higher standard of living and arrested Briand called those Baltic republics the honest republics.
Evacuated from the towns, they have to live in villages in order to shorten their lives. A law prohibits to raise the temperature in the flat or at the working place to more than 12 degrees centigrade. The supply of electric power is also limited, and even communist propaganda is falling short because TV is only 2 hours on the air. The situation is so critical that the government uses the last straw in putting the power station under military guard. Destructions of unimaginable extent also began recently. Churches and historical monuments are systematically demolished. The Romanian people have lost all hope due to terror and depression.
Here we saw the 40th anniversary of Yalta Agreement and the end of the Second World War. Our Slovak World Congress issued a declaration in which it pointed out that within a few short years the Soviet Union flagrantly violated all its obligations and commitments under Yalta, the Atlantic Charter, the United Nations Charter, and later also under the final act of Helsinki Conference. The Soviets brutally subjugated all the nations between the Baltic, Black, and Adriatic seas, forceful and totalitarian regimes against their will, and by the use of military power, they suppressed all their attempts to rid themselves of this oppression. This year also saw the 100th anniversary of the death of the first Archbishop of our Slovak ancestors, St. Methodius, the younger brother of St. Cyril, the inventor of the Slavonic script and translator of the Bible. Yet the communist regime of Prague did not allow the Slovaks freely to commemorate their patron saints, who, together with St. Benedict, are patrons of the whole of Europe, thus emphasizing the imperative postulate of European unity. In their own country, the Slovaks are being jailed for receiving a religious literature from abroad. Their priests are denied state permission to perform their pastoral duties. Slovak culture, cultural life, is spiritually impoverished and stunted. Schools and cultural institutions became only vehicles of atheist and communist propaganda.
The Ukrainian insurgent army was organized, and the Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council set up as a form of underground government to give more striking power to the struggle. The struggle continued on a grand scale until '53, and then it was reorganized to become more effective in changing conditions to resist the Soviet onslaught more effectively. The resistance was so strong that the Soviets had to negotiate a special agreement with Red Czechoslovakia and Red Poland to suppress the Ukrainian insurgent army. In order to weaken the resistance, the Soviets applied mass terror by incarceration, deportation, and direct liquidation of the resistant fighters without trial. Then, in 1952 and 53, the members of the aoun and UPA, Ukrainian insurgent army, had massive revolts in the Soviet concentration camps, in the result of which many camps had to be dissolved. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the resistance movement was resumed in the 1960s by the so-called Shestakhniki, and in 1970s by the so-called 70-Shestakhniki, very much in the tradition of the struggle during and immediately after the Second World War. The resistance demanded the right of Ukrainian language to develop, the right worship according the right to secede from the Soviet Union. The struggle continues until today by being made evident through even the Soviet press itself, which currently reports and arrests and executions of the Ukrainian patriots in the tradition of the struggle for many, many decades.
Parce que de nombreux immigrants avaient été impliqués dans la résistance anticommuniste. Maintenant, ce n'est pas plus aussi facile d'être militant parce qu'ici, dans le monde libre, il n'est pas à la mode, semble-t-il, de se montrer anticommuniste.
Jaroslav Stetsko. Vice President, representative of the Afghan Mujahideen movement. Chairman of the Bulgarian National Front. Chairman of the Belarusian Liberation Movement. Representative of the World Federation of Free Latvians. President of the Supreme Lithuanian Liberation Council. Chairman of the Romanian Freedom Front. Every member of the national organization belongs to the Central Committee of ADN with one vote. Secretary General will be appointed by the Central Committee. Executive Chairman and Head of the External Affairs Department, Mrs. Slava Stetsko. Members of the External Affairs Department, Dr. Karkevich, Chicago, AFABN, Mrs. Roxana Pater, New York, AFFBN, Dimko Stadev, Bulgaria, Rome, Dr. A. Sugar, Romania, Germany. Then the Scientific and Strategic Research Committee, Dr. Hayek, Turkestan, Dr. Kaimur, Afghanistan, Dr. Rameshvili, Georgia, Mr. Glinsky, Belarus. Military Committee, Mr. Habib Bayer, Afghanistan, Dr. B. Crook, former soldier of Ukrainian Insurgent Army, Colonel Kosmovich, Belarusia, Colonel Bankovsky, Bulgaria, Mr. Trella, Estonia. Information and Mass Media Committee, Mrs. Paris, Latvia, Mr. Soldatov, Estonia, Ms. Kapustinsky, ABN Correspondence, Mr. Vaitunas, USA. Organizational Committee, Mr. Berko, Slovakia, Mr. Statue of ABN Canada, Mr. Thompson, Latvia. Financial Committee, Mr. Rigoni, Hungary, Chairman. Then Dr. N. Bich, USA, Peter Azulas, Lithuania. The Culture Committee, Mr. Dimitri, Great Britain, Mr. Wazowski, Slovakia, Mr. Bielinski, Poland. Arbitration Board, Mr. Gaius, Lithuania, Mr. Bajas, Cuba, and Mr. Kosav, Belarus. And then comes Presidium of the Council of Nations. President, Mr. Barry Kajun Khan, President of the National Kyrgyzstan Unity Committee. Vice Chairman, Professor Chirasky, IBN, Ukrainian Liberation Movement, USA, Dr. Dochev, Bulgarian National Front, USA, Secretary General Dr. A. Illich, Croatian Liberation Movement. One vote for each nation with 5 delegates. And then finally, the Youth Committee. Mr. Zenon Koval, Belgium, Ms. Irina Chalupa, USA, Mr. Stefan Lescu, Great Britain, Ms. Larissa Fiegel, Canada, Mr. Rustinsky, USA, Major Tran Chow, AFABN, Mr. Huang Clark, AFABN, Lieutenant Gadet, AFABN, Miss Irene Kapustinsky, Germany, Mr. Paul Mason, and Mr. Gary Noor. Thank you.
Yes, please. I would like to second the proposal by Professor Chirowski.
So, thank you very much. So that's proposed, seconded. I can't remember that was all as it stands. Are there any other proposals? No? Can I have your vote on this proposal, please? Thank you. Anybody against? No. Thank you very much. That is happily lunchtime. Can I just refresh my memory? Are we back at 2 o'clock exactly?
Yes, I have one audition.
Just one announcement, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we are going to lunch, I would like to announce that the Ukrainian Youth Association has organized an exhibition of relics of Ukraine independence. And this exhibition will be opened at today noon time, I mean from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. If somebody can go there, will be most cordially invited. And this exhibition will be opened on Friday from, it means today, from 1:30 until 9 o'clock in the evening. Tomorrow from 2 o'clock until 9 o'clock in the evening, and Sunday from 2 o'clock until 6 o'clock in the evening. And I will also remind you that we have a demonstration on Sunday at 2 o'clock in front of Soviet Russian Embassy. We would kindly invite you to organize your people, your flags, your placards, your leaflets, and to be present there with us together. And now we are just joining and we will enjoy our lunch.
The Freedom Council session. And I think at the outset the most appropriate thing for me to do before calling our distinguished representatives from the various countries within Western Europe to give an overview on behalf of myself, and I'll do that now. This overview extends back to the year 1983. You will recall that at the end of 1982 we had another EFC conference, EFC-ABN conference here in London. So this is carrying us back over the past 3 years. In July of 1983 we had the commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the captive nations and the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the ABN. The president of ABN, Mr. Jaroslav Stetsko, and myself gave speeches at these commemorations in the Washington Capitol. On the 25th anniversary of the captive nations in Great Britain and the 40th anniversary of the ABN, I myself accompanied Mr. Jaroslav Stetsko to the installation of a plaque in Bradford Cathedral, which was a moment of particular pride for myself as a former Member of Parliament for the city of Bradford. That took place on the 20th of November, and on the 19th of November, the day before, there'd been a commemoration in London. On the 40th anniversary of the ABN, there was another commemoration in Munich on the 5th of November. Madame Ursula Appel-Kron, MDB, and myself attended. I serve on the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and on the 27th of January I delivered a speech at the Parliamentary Assembly on the 27th of January 1983, in which I suggested, among other things, that the flags of the subjugated nations be raised during Captive Nations Week. This speech occurred on a motion dealing with the situation of Jews in the Soviet Union. And I said on that occasion, of course, the Jews are not alone among racial minorities to suffer in the USSR. The official Russification policy is offensive to Ukrainians, Belarusians, Latvians, Lithuanians, and Estonians, among others. At least the Soviet Jews now have a national home in Israel, where they may settle and feel welcome if, and this is the big if, they are lucky enough to get out of the Soviet Union, for which they require the official sponsorship of relatives in Israel. Outside this building, the Parliamentary Assembly building, the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, there fly the flags of the 21 member countries in the Council of Europe. Why do we not, I asked, like the United States, fly the flags of the captive nations of Eastern Europe during Captive Nations Week? On the 29th of September, in the Council of Europe again, I once more made a speech in which I defended the position of the oppressed people of the nations incorporated by force of arms within the Soviet Russian Empire. And I quote, "I argue that the Soviet foreign policy would become more confident if we ignored the pressures within the Soviet Bloc. But anyway," I asked, "do we have peace in our continent? The Soviet invasion of the fraternal socialist republics of Hungary in 1956 and of Czechoslovakia in 1968, the Soviet invasion of neutral Afghanistan in 1979, like the Soviet invasion of neutral Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in 1940, the imposition of martial law in Poland in 1981 with Soviet support, and the suppression 30 years ago this year, I speak in 1983, by Soviet tanks of the People's Uprising East Berlin are hardly peaceful actions, any more than were the enforced famine in Ukraine 50 years ago, when millions died, or the deportation of Crimean Tatars, Cossacks, and last but not least, the treatment of ethnic Germans, to which the report refers." Then I organised 73 members of the British Parliament to sign an early day motion which lay upon the order paper of the House of Commons, and it read that this House, wishing to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the designation by President Eisenhower of the United States of America of the third week in July as Captive Nations Week in the United States, and recognizing the common commitment to the principles of freedom, democracy, and self-determination of peoples shared by the USA and United Kingdom, urges Her Majesty's government also to designate officially the third week in July as Captive Nations Week in the UK as a symbol of the British nation's support for the restoration of the right to self-determination, democracy, and freedom for the peoples within the Soviet Union and of Eastern Europe behind the Iron Curtain. I made efforts in order to have the Ukrainian language introduced in the service of the BBC, the overseas service, that is the BBC. However, I regret to inform delegates that until now these efforts were unsuccessful. I received a reply from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that due to financial difficulties, it is not possible for such a service to be introduced. However, I think we should recognise that the introduction would, at the very least, cost only £100,000. So that must be, I think, a continuing concern of ours to have such a service instituted in the overseas service of the BBC. I also held several meetings in London on the 20th of January 83, 21st of April 83, and on other occasions, with the purpose of establishing a President's office in London, since the Secretariat of the EFC is in Munich. to organise a British chapter of the EFC and create a parliamentary group for national freedom of the subjugated nations. The Honorary President of the EFC, His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg, in the European Parliament in 1983, introduced a resolution on the situation behind the Iron Curtain in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, calling on the United Nations to recognise the rights of the Baltic states to self-determination and independence, and demanding a referendum on this issue, condemning the occupation of these states by the Soviet Union, and suggesting to the foreign ministers to submit the issue of the Baltic states to the Decolonisation Subcommittee of the United Nations. His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg suggested to Mr Tom Spencer, British MP, to introduce a resolution condemning Soviet Russia for the artificially created famine in Ukraine, which cost Ukraine 7 million lives. This resolution calls to designate the 21st of May as Ukraine Day. It further calls on its president, that is of the European Democratic Group, to transmit this motion for resolution to the Commission and Council of the European Communities, to the Conference of Foreign Ministers meeting in political cooperation, and to the Ambassador to the United Nations of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Mr. Jaroslav Stetsko visited Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick in 1983 and her first deputy ambassador in 1984, contesting the representation of Russia and Ukraine in the United Nations by Moscow puppets. And Mr. Stetsko requested that they should be replaced by the representatives of these respective nations who are leading the liberation movements of their countries. The ABN president also kept in contact with the US chairman of the Olympic Committee over the question of the participation of athletes from the subjugated nations in the Olympic Games. Mr. Stetsko met with myself on many occasions and discussed matters pertaining to the FC with Professor Magnino and, of course, with Mr. Kirkpatrick and Mr. Bertil Hegman. Mr. Stetsko frequently corresponded with the Honorary President, His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg, and other members of the Presidium. Mr. Bertil Hegman, Director of the Institute for Political Psychological Freedom Campaign, visited Canada and the United States with a lecture tour. He also spoke on several radio stations. Madame Slava Stetsko, besides attending the secretarial activities of the EFC, tried to promote the idea of convening the EFC Youth Conference. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to carry this idea through. Mrs. Stetsko was also responsible for the preparation of 2 annual EFC meetings in Munich. On the 12th and 13th of May 1983, the ABN and the EFC held an enlarged executive board meeting in Munich. The meeting was presided by the EFC chairman, that is myself, and I delivered a speech on the current military position of NATO. The other speakers on that occasion were the Honorary Chairman, His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg, whose speech was dedicated to the possibilities of EFC cooperation with the European Parliament in light of the present international political situation. ABN President and Honorary Presidium Member of the EFC, Mr. Stetsko, spoke on the analysis of the current military position behind the Iron Curtain. The Honourable Guillermo Kirkpatrick MP analysed the position of the Spanish Peninsula in the context of the European defence system. Professor Magnino from Italy dedicated his attention to the younger generation, and Mr. Bertil Hegman elaborated the whole plan of political warfare department. The first generation Ukrainian to be elected to a national parliament in any of the Western democracies. That is correct. And we're so proud and pleased and lucky that it should be the House of Commons that he's chosen, because I'm sure he could have gone into any of them. And another good thing in a way about it. I mean, it's a particular point of pride, and I reckon it's something that is perhaps evidence that we're more fair-minded in the UK than is always recognised. He was elected for Cardiff West in 1983 for the constituency of Cardiff West, which I believe has a very small Ukrainian community indeed, maybe almost in single figures, is that right? None, he says. The single figure is 0. He contested the seat twice before, and he also fought the Euro constituency. He served as a councillor for 27 years for the Conservative Party in Cardiff and in the county of South Glamorgan. He is presently a member of the Select Committee for Welsh Affairs, and of course he's a famous past chairman of Cardiff Football Club, for those of you that follow our national game. The Honourable Stefan Terlecki.
John, President Stetsko, Madam Stetsko, honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, you ain't heard nothing yet. And I am not going to make my maiden speech now or today, so I was told. So how little I have to tell you something about whatever it may be, I will have to keep in suspense until I am told when I shall be allowed to make a speech. Nevertheless, I have been honored and privileged to be elected the chairman of the EFC, and also having got excellent officers elected at the same time to do what is within our power to do for the benefit not just of the EFC, but on behalf of all those little cards which are on the tables now, and I'm looking at them. If I would read them all out, then we'd be having here not only dinner but breakfast also, because there are so many of them, and I respect them, I support them, and I shall go on supporting all those cards and all of you who represent the cards in front of you. I tried to do my best because as a new member of Parliament, a backbencher, I've got to keep quiet, I've got to listen, and I've got to watch. But that's not my nature. I don't try to be too forceful or forward, but at the same time, I have been elected representing over 60,000 electorates, and I am in the House of Commons, which I consider to be the matter of Parliament, cradle of democracy, which entitles, irrespective of age or height or the length of service, to speak one's mind in what I already have said, cradle of democracy. And up till now, I think I have succeeded of saying things that is dear to my heart, not only as far as my own constituency of Cardiff West is concerned, but also on issues that concerns the world, concerns Europe, and in particular, that concerns the oppressed nations behind the Iron Curtains, satellite states, and for that matter, all other nations that are oppressed by Marxism and communism throughout the world. And so, I am trying to do my best to contribute and for your voice to be my voice in the House of Commons and wherever I travel. And over the past 2 years or so, again, I have been very privileged being nominated by my party in the House of Commons to travel far and wide. For example, over the past 2.5 years, I have traveled to Bangkok, to Taiwan, to Hong Kong, to Israel, to Jordan, to Qatar, Persian Gulf, and near home, Dublin, so that I and many of my colleagues, when we travel together, have some facts and finding out the relationship between the United Kingdom and all other countries here today in their own respective languages also. As well as having traveled to all the countries I have mentioned, I also have had interviews with the press, international press, as well as the media such as BBC, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and to my very, very pleasant surprise, when my father visited me from Siberia last year, he was telling me that I was heard on the radio in my own village. And I thought that was absolutely magnificent, that I have been heard on the British radio, British broadcast, speaking in Ukrainian. And some of the villagers said, he speaks better Ukrainians than we do. Well, I am not so sure, after 42 years of separation from my loved ones and my country, to retain Ukrainian language, I can tell you, for me personally, it's as hard as climbing Mount Everest in the valley shoes and reach the top. It's very hard indeed, but I'm trying to do my best. Also, as the chairman of the EFC, I managed during the parliamentary recess, where most of my colleagues, excluding John because he travels and he works very, very hard, and I am telling you this most sincerely, but where during the recess, most of my parliamentary colleagues, they whether dig their gardens or cutting the lawns or go to Costa Brava or French Riviera for holidays, I decided to travel in the United Kingdom as the chairman of the EFC, and I visited Leicester, Newcastle, and Bradford branches, speaking at those branches with the support of my officers. I am honestly very pleased and highly delighted to have such marvelous officers working with me, taking nothing away whatsoever from my predecessors and from the chairman, previous chairman of the EFC. They did excellent work, and I only hope that I will be able to fulfill my predecessor and his officers the aim that we are trying to achieve. And what we're trying to achieve is to spread the gospel, in a way, the apostles' gospel, but with small a, so that the nation, that the people in the United Kingdom and beyond, in all those countries that I have traveled, as I already told you, that they know why we are in the West and not in our respective countries, that they know what our aim is, that they know that Soviet Empire is, without a doubt, an evil empire. How can it be otherwise? The Russian army slaughtering men, women, and children in Afghanistan. Polish solidarity is being contained to the ground. In the Ukraine and in all other countries, there is no free speech, free travel, free press, free religion. So, my message would be to Mr. Gorbachev, let his heart smile as loud and as often as open as his mouth. And when those two will coincide, then I think we can say that our brothers and sisters, our relatives, and all the nations that are now being oppressed by the Soviet regime, one day can breathe in rejoice, and take freedom as much for granted as we do in this country, so that as the empires came and gone, let us hope, through various branches, through the organization of the IBM, through the EFC, we will all see the day alive when our respective nations will be as free as the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, as one would have expected, that was a true tour de force, and we've been very lucky to hear it. The next spokesman that I would like to call to give a report is Mrs. Sandor of Scandinavia. Mrs. Sandor here? This is, of course, Bertil Hegman's report, but I regret to have to inform you that he was called back urgently to Sweden because of the grave illness of his mother.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to read a report by Bertil Hegman, member of the Swedish Authors Association in Sweden, and he is director in the Institute of Political Psychological Freedom Company. This report is covering the period from the conference in Munich 1984 to London today. Since the autumn 1984, the Institute for Political Psychological Freedom Conference, APPCS, publishes a quality newsletter, The Political Warfare Front, which is distributed to the members of the Institute and a number of contacts worldwide. Some of the material in the newsletter has been reprinted in ABN correspondence, and the report of the Freedom Fighter Conference in Jamba, Angola, was picked up by the West German newsletter ABC Berichte, number 73, October 1st, 1985. A copy of the German article is attached to this report as an appendix.
Parliament since 1982. He serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Cortes and is spokesman for the opposition on foreign affairs in that committee. He serves also on the Spanish delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and were colleagues on the European Democratic Group in that body. In a distinguished career, Mr. Kirkpatrick has served in the Spanish mission to Sofia, Bulgaria, when he was a diplomat from 71 to 73, and then more recently in the United Kingdom, here in London, in the Spanish embassy from 73 to 77. So really for us, it's a case for welcoming in UK an old friend back, and it's someone who knows the reality of life behind the Iron Curtain at first hand. Guillermo Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Jan, for that those very kind words about me, and thank you all of you for all the attention you pay to my very, very brief words, because I think we are all looking forward to hear to the main speaker today, General Singlov. I would like to tell you that I conveyed to the conference, as I told President Stetsko yesterday, the greetings of the Spanish opposition leader, the leader of my political party, the Conservative Party in Spain, now in opposition, Manuel Fraga Iribarne, who wants you to know that in your struggle for freedom, you are not alone. And the proof that in your struggle for freedom, you are not alone in the world is that we are all here conveying message and being with you as happy as ever in order to really see the faces of the people who are trying to get freedom back in their own countries. As John has kindly told you before, I have had the opportunity as a diplomat, a former diplomat, of spending several years in the diplomatic mission at a time in Sofia, in Bulgaria, from 1971 to 1973. I'm very pleased to have here with us the board Dr. Dochev, who really knows, of course, much more than I can do about that lovely country, Bulgaria, now oppressed under the totalitarian dictatorship system of all the countries of the Eastern world. I cannot tell you any more things that you don't know. I could see for 3 years the faces of the people there who were full of fear and who didn't really like, of course, didn't really like to be treated the way they are treated by their imperialistic neighbor country, the Soviet Union. As you know, the country is a lovely one. The people love freedom and love developing the economic situation of this very rich land. But unfortunately, the same as it happens to all your countries, unfortunately, the dictatorship of one imperialistic power, one of the evil powers in the world, that imperialistic power doesn't let the people enjoy the freedom that here in England, and now we in Spain, we have the same as in all the Western countries. Well, I want you to know that you are not alone in this fight, in this struggle, and that in the Council of Europe, in all the international bodies, wherever we go in the world, all of us, we are determined to help you in that fight. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kirkpatrick. It's good to have you with us, and we're very pleased to have your experience mobilized in the support of our joint cause. Thank you very much for those inspiring words. I'd now like to ask from the Benelux countries, from Belgium in particular, Commandant Ramboux, Chairman of the European Council for World Freedom, to say a few words. Yes,
Mr. Chairman, Honorable Stetsko, General Sinclair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. This is the first time I have the opportunity to speak at an EFC meeting, and I thank you for that. If I accepted the kind invitation from Mrs. Stetsko, it is to show you my interest for your cause and to insist on the interdependence of all the nations in the world. Be sure that I do not forget the subjugated nations who are already in slavery. The latter are, and the other are threatened to become. It is therefore I insist on the word interdependence. Those who are lucky enough to be free have to remain aware with the Soviet danger, and they have to help those who are enslaved. We must not neglect
are seeking for USA assistance. We need it, of course. But for sea war, the USA needs us. La Fontaine wrote, excuse me if I quote in French, on a souvent besoin d'un plus petit que soi. You very often need somebody weaker than you are. Clausewitz wrote, be always strong, that is true, but you cannot be strong everywhere. I quote here the slogan or the main idea of the Belgian Commando Unit. United we conquer. Separated we are porous. We may not be selfish nor stupid or stupid-eyed like those who ignore the Soviet fate. I speak about the pacifists and those who are opposed to the NATO and to the missiles in free Europe. They are stupid or paid by our enemies. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Commandant Ramboul. We're very glad that you were able to take part, and thank you for your expression of support. Now I think we come to what must be undoubtedly one of the real highlights of our conference. The guest speaker, whom I have the honor to introduce, is General John K. Singlaub. General Singlaub has had a distinguished military career that has spanned decades and continents. From organizing French resistance units during World War II to leading the Joint Unconventional Warfare Task Force, his career has frequently been in the forefront of military action. In December 1944, he led Chinese guerrillas against the Japanese on the Indo-Chinese border. He also led a mission which resulted in the rescue of 400 Allied prisoners of war held by the Japanese Hainan Islands. General Singlaub was assigned chief of a US military liaison mission to Mukden, Manchuria from early 1946 until late 1948, when he was forced out by the Chinese communists. In December 1951, General Singlaub volunteered for service in Korea. In May 1966, he was assigned to Vietnam as commander of the Joint Unconventional Warfare Task Force. On July 1st, 1976, he was assigned Chief of Staff, United Nations Command, US Forces Korea, and the 8th US Army in Seoul, Korea. He served as the United Nations Command senior military member of the Military Armistice Commission at Panmunjom. During his career, General Singlaub has contributed greatly to the cause of freedom of many nations and to the struggle against communism. As a civilian, General Singlaub has continued to work for the same aims to which he dedicated himself while he was a serving military officer. He is the national chairman of the United States Council for World Freedom and the co-chairman of the American Security Council Coalition for Peace Through Strength. General Singlaub is also the president of the World Anti-Communist League. General Singlaub.
Thank you, Mr. President, President Stetsko, honorary members of the Presidium, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply honored by the invitation to come back to London to address this conference and the activists for liberty and the advocates of liberation who have been assembled here today. I'm pleased to associate with so many who have dedicated their lives, their fortunes, their reputations, and their sacred honor to the struggle for freedom for all mankind. No greater cause can be undertaken by free men today, anywhere, and I salute you all. I congratulate the organizers for their selection of the conference theme, High and Low Frontiers, Strategic Defense and Liberation. Nothing could be more current and relevant in the days following the summit meetings in Geneva. We can all be thankful that President Reagan stood firm on his plan to seek the development of a space-based ballistic missile defense system. This strategic defense initiative, which is also known as Project High Frontier, is designed to perpetuate the deterrence against the use of intercontinental ballistic missiles and, when modified by the Europeans, against the intermediate range ballistic missiles such as the SS-20 that threaten us as we sit here today. Most important, the high frontier strategic defense systems, whether it's the Strategic Defense Initiative or the new concept of a European Defense Initiative, will provide the free world a defense against these missiles in the event that deterrence fails. They will provide a defense of the nation and guarantee the survivability of the free world. And this is something lacking in the current strategy of mutual assured destruction. In the course of the discussions here today, we've heard many references to the fact that we are in this year of 1985 commemorating the 40th anniversary of several significant events. It was 40 years ago this year that the war with Nazi Germany was brought to a successful conclusion and the liberation of Western Europe. It was 40 years ago, this same year, that the war with Imperial Japan was terminated again, with the liberation of a great deal of Asia that had been brought under control of the Japanese Empire as a part of the greater East Asia co-prosperity spirit. But more significantly, it was 40 years ago that we learned that our wartime ally, the USSR, was in fact dedicated to our destruction. And this appeared to be an act of ingratitude that was very hard for our allies to accept. There are, in fact, many in the United States today who still doubt the true intentions of the Soviet Union. And in these 40 years, during which on the average one nation per year was incorporated into the Soviet Empire, we have noticed in the last 4 of those years no new colonies added to the Soviet Empire. As a matter of fact, and I think most important, in 1983 we had the liberation of one of those potential outer colonies, and of course I refer to the liberation of the small island of Grenada. There is a military axiom that when when the attack in one area has been slowed or stopped, it is time for you to consider the consolidation of your reserves with a view toward launching a counterattack or a counteroffensive. This is where the concept of a low frontier comes into being. I'm not talking about a military offensive. I'm talking about a psychological, a political, an economic, a spiritual offensive against the evil forces of communism. I'm talking about a truth offensive. Let us, from now on, decide to tell it like it is, to use a colloquialism that we all hear from our children, without concern whether it will offend the Soviet Union or Communist China. The facts are, as the President of the United States has tried to say on several occasions, and has been criticized by the media for doing so, communism is an evil empire. Let's face it, communism kills. Communism uses terrorism as an instrument of internal and foreign policy. The terrorism that we witness in the Middle East today is not an accident created by dissidents. It is, in fact, a policy of the communist empire. Those who are conducting terrorism throughout the world have been trained by the Soviet Union and its surrogates for that purpose. Why, under these circumstances, should we support, even subsidize, in many cases, communist governments anywhere? Why are we underwriting communist governments, preventing communist bank failures? This is suicidal in the total picture. And I would say to U.S. congressmen, as I often do, or to members of parliament of any nation, have you talked to a refugee lately? Have you talked to the one of approximately 1 million boat people that have escaped from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia? Have you talked to the one of the 100,000 Mosquito Indians who have escaped from Nicaragua? Have you talked to one of the Cambodians fleeing from the Vietnamese occupation of their homeland? Have you talked to a Lao tribesman who survived a yellow rain attack on his village? Have you talked to an Afghan who staggered into Pakistan on bare feet with his hands blown off from a Soviet mine? Have you talked to an Ethiopian who's been the victim of a deliberately created famine in that country? Well, let me assure you, ladies and gentlemen, I have spoken to those people. And while the stories that they tell will make you weep, they also bring some good news. In these and in other communist colonies, the people without outside help have concluded that it is better to be dead than remain red. Taken up arms against their Soviet masters. There are at least 8 active democratic revolutions ongoing at this time. 3 of them in Africa, in Angola, Mozambique, and Ethiopia. 3 in Southeast Asia.